Hello.
Hello,
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I think it's
Good
9 o'clock.
morning.
Good morning, everyone. And so, hello, Prof. Show. Yes.
Good morning. I said hello, but I was mute. Sorry.
Okay. So I think it's 9 o'clock now in Bangkok, and it should be 11 in Korea. Also 9 in Indonesia, 10 in Philippines. Okay. So I saw that we have about 25 now, and I think should we start now, because otherwise we'll be late. And should we start now? I haven't seen John. Hello, Sarah. So you are here on the presenter in first session are here now. Hi, hello, John.
Hi, Jantima.
Okay. So,
What time is it in the USA?
yeah, it's
9 p.m.
Okay, 9 p.m.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so I think so. We should start now. Yes. Welcome to another academics service to ANPOR members and friends. This is ANPOR's second event for this year, 2023, because last week we had another first event about TikTok. It's very exciting also. And today, ANPOR Korea, CAPORCI, and the Asian Journal for Public Opinion Research are co-hosting a free virtual workshop for researchers and scholars to help support the continued development of public opinion research in Asia. This exciting half-day seminar focuses on providing insight to strengthen the writing capabilities of those interested to in publishing their research paper in the international journal listed in leading database such as Scopus, Web of Science. Also, this opens an opportunity for the PhD student to share their emerging voice on public opinion research in Asia. Today's event could not be a great success without dedicated teamwork from editorial board members of the AJPOR and ANPOR teams. Special thanks to Sarah, our managing editors, and Tui Natakorn, ANPOR web director, for all the logistics that bring us to this event. Thanks to all the presenters, moderators, and discussants. Without participants, this workshop would not be perfect. My heartfelt thanks to all gathering here virtually today. Now, may I turn the floor to our editor-in-chief, Dr. John Kennedy, for brief greetings. Hello, John.
Hello. Thank you, Jantima. And I'd like to, first of all, to echo what Jantima just said. We really do owe quite a bit to the organizers, ANPOR CAPORCI and ANPOR Korea, for taking on the effort to bring this workshop to us. Tonight's workshop really has two different sessions, but they're very closely tied together. One of them focuses on manuscript preparation and what kinds of things that journals such as AJPOR are looking for when they receive a manuscript for review. And the second one is for graduate students, which I'm really excited about because I don't think that we often provide enough guidance to graduate students. Now, all of these graduate students have mentors who are probably giving them very good advice on how to prepare articles, how to do their research. But in fact, sometimes it takes someone from outside to say a few things that's very similar to what their mentors are saying, but turns out to be very important for having them really believe that these things are important. So I'm glad that we have this chance to do it. I don't know if we'll necessarily add much to what they're already hearing, but as they hear it a second time, sometimes it sinks in a little better and helps them think through a little more. The first session, Brian Bantugan, Song Kheokao, and Sarah LoCascio will talk about some of the challenges that we face at AJPOR and probably other journals when we receive manuscripts that may have very good research in them, but are not prepared fully for the review process. And that we're getting articles in that we think this could be something, but we really need to have more, for example, literature review or a better description of the methods before we can send it on to the co-editors and then to the reviewers. And so I think that all of us, not just graduate students, would learn from what they're going to say tonight, because it is really important for us who are on the processing end of manuscripts to be able to adequately review them when they are fully written and the way that we expect them to be written. And the second session is that we're really working on having current grad students presenting their current research and getting feedback both from me and from Chungnam Miao, we both looked at these their PowerPoints that they've sent and I have thoughts, I'm sure she has too, that on what we might do to provide some feedback to help them to further their research and their also further their ability to send the research off to journals and more likely to have it accepted. So collectively, I think that all of us will benefit from this workshop, whether we're just watching the first three presenters talk about what's needed, because all of us, in many cases, when we do submit things, we are deficient in ways. And second, I think it's helpful to for us to hear what reviewers think about research that we see and how it may be improved. Grad students can perhaps save a step or save a little bit of anxiety by anticipating what's going to come. And not only grad students, but others can do that. So again, I welcome all of you to this workshop. I look forward to it myself, to seeing, hearing what's going on and seeing again the PowerPoints and talking about the issues that all of these sessions will raise. And thank you again for all of you for being willing to spend some time today with us, and hopefully you'll be contributing in your own way to all of the workshop and letting us know ways that you think both the publication process and the review process can be improved. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for your insight. And then we are now ready for the first session. And I may now turn the floor to Dr. Dorien Kartikawangi. She is from Atma Jaya Catholic University of Indonesia. She will be our moderator for the first session. Please, Dr. Dorien.
Thank you, Prof. Jantima. Good morning, everyone. Good night in the US. It's really happy to be here as your moderator because ANPOR is in my heart, you know, like we work all together for several years. And today we will have this workshop, and I'm very excited because it's not only for the PhD, but for all of us. As mentioned earlier, this first session will consist of 3 speakers. First is Professor Kheokao, and then Dr. Brian Bantugan and Sarah LoCascio. And without further ado, I would like to invite the first presenter. He will talk about methodology mistakes, clarifying your work from sampling to analysis. Prof. Kheokao from Chungnam University, Chungnam National University, South Korea. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have for my presentation?
Yeah, all together we have 1.5 hours. So if you can make it like 20 minutes each presenter, then we will have Q&A after.
Okay, I'll be brief. I read many papers submitted to our journal, not only to our journal, but to also other journals, because sometimes I am invited by other journals to review the papers. And I found many good papers do not have some proper way of presenting their methodology. And for that reason, they may not get the review result. So you may not be able to find the examples, examples of the mistakes I will tell you, because usually the papers with these mistakes may not appear in the journal. They may have corrected these mistakes or may have been rejected. So I selected the 5 most common mistakes. So I will tell the first one. So some papers just simply provide the sample size and survey mode and sampling method only. For example, I've conducted random sampling of 500 university students, something like that. You can see the examples. I cannot show the real examples because, as I said, those papers with these mistakes do not appear on the journal. But instead, I will show you some good examples. For example, here, the data, when you see this description of data, you can find how the data were collected, which was the population, what was the sample size, how it was selected. This is the example of one of the papers which was published in our journal, and it shows detailed information of the sampling process. And this is another example. This is not sampling of respondent, it is about the messages in the Facebook. So those messages were selected, and this shows how it selected those messages. So I don't need to tell how to present what information should be included. I simply say, please try to include as much information as possible about your sampling process. If you are not sure whether how much information is enough, just provide as much as possible. If some information is too much, then the reviewers will say, please reduce a little. So don't worry about that. And also another, especially when you miss the information about target population or the sampling frame, response rate, you should check whether this information is included or not. If sometimes you do not have a sampling frame, that means the sampling methodology you employ may not be the probability sampling. So when you apply the terms random sampling to your sampling, to your data, then you should have these informations. If you do not have this information, it may not be random sampling, then you should not use the term random sampling to describe your sampling. So try to use proper term for describing your sampling. Some papers just simply use the convenience sample, but apply the term random sampling or cluster sampling, those terms, which should be used only when the sampling was conducted in a probabilistic way. So when your paper have that kind of term, the reviewers try to find the sampling frame. What is the sampling frame? What is the selection probability? What is the response rate? What is the target? They try to find that information, but your paper does not provide that information. Then the reviewers may realize, this is not done in a random sampling, but they use the term random sampling. that means the authors may not know properly about sampling procedure. So it will ruin your credibility as an expertise. So try to use the term correctly. And maybe when you use non-probability sample, you have to also provide the detailed information about the process. Especially, I want to suggest that why you chose that non-random sampling instead of probability-based sampling. You may have several reasons. So please try to share your reason why you chose non-random sampling. And also you have to show that even your data is drawn from non-random sampling, it can provide the answer to your research question. So it is always better to use random sample, but random sample is very cost a lot and very expensive and time consuming. So sometimes you may have to use non-random sample, but in that case, you have to show that random sample can provide the answer to your research question. So sometimes your research question can be answered by non-random sample, but you have to show it. Do not ask the reviewers to determine that. You have to provide the reason, the reason why your sample, your data can provide the answer to your research questions. Okay, and then here. Okay. So another common mistakes I can find is the scale. So when you want to measure some concept, for example, happiness or quality of life or some personality, you want to measure that, you need the scale. And the authors usually borrow the scale from other study. Sometimes you have to develop the scale by yourself, but in most cases, people just use the scale developed by others. And then they usually show, I used the scale used by such and such study, and the scale was used in other studies, something like that. But nowhere I cannot find why that scale, the particular scale, is valid for measuring the concept you want to measure. So you have to show the scale you chose is valid measurement instrument for the concept. So when you use the scale developed by others, it is not enough to just list the studies which used the scale. You have to find the paper which validate that scale. It is not difficult to find the paper. If you carefully read the paper which use the scale, they may have indicated where they borrowed the scale and how, when, by whom the scale was validated. Try to find the scale and read that paper and review the paper. So you have to be confident of the scale, of the validity of the scale you use. You just simply use the scale. This is used by someone else, and I can use it. Do not assume in that way. Try to read the original validation paper and try to see. You have to be confident. This scale can be a good measure of the concept. Then you introduce your review in your paper. So usually this is missing. Usually people just say, Cromba alpha was something, and do not say why you chose that scale. Sometimes there are many different scales for measuring same concept. For example, if you try to find the measurement instrument for quality of life, you can find many different scales. Then you have to choose one. And in that case, it is better to give the reason why you chose that scale rather than other scales. So selecting the valid scale is important, but that does not mean you have to validate the scale by yourself. Usually the scales you chose are or have been validated by others. So try to find the paper and introduce it. And also some papers use when you use the measurement, it has the scale value. So I want to measure happiness from 1 to 10. 10 denote the maximum happiness and 1 denote the least happiness, something like that. Then you have to provide that scale assignment rule. So you should not say simply, I measured the happiness using such and such scale items. Then suddenly you say, the average score of the student was the 5.0. Then we do not know what is the maximum value, what is the minimum value, how you get the 5.0. So we do not know whether 5.0 is the lower score or higher score. We cannot decide. So you have to show the minimum and maximum value and what means the maximum and what means the minimum. So this is one. And if you read the papers, if you can many papers in the AJPOR, which uses the many survey or experimental data, and they all use the scale and they show the scales very in detail. So if you go, so for example, if you go here, you can find the descriptions. And also sometimes you need to see whether before the analysis, you have to see whether the assumptions are met before conducting your statistical analysis. Each statistical analysis, for example, regression has its own assumptions and t-test has its own assumptions. All the statistical analysis assumes a certain state. So you have to test whether the assumptions are met by your data. But usually some people just omit that process. Maybe they have tested the assumptions, but do not provide the result of the test of the assumptions. It is better to show the test result of the assumptions, especially when the reader think, this assumption should have been checked, or the assumption, whether the assumptions are met or not, should be checked in careful. So the reviewers may have that kind of questions. So it is better to provide the test result of the assumptions, even in briefly. For example, the most common one might be something like that. You applied linear regression analysis to your data, but have not seen whether the relationship between two variables are linear or not. Sometimes we can think these two variables may not provide a linear relationship, but you applied the regression analysis with the assumption of a linear relationship. Then the reviewers think, this is a little strange. So whether the linear relationship has been checked or not, they may wonder. So always better to provide the relationship. Also, the variability of the variable should also be checked. For example, some study said age was important and included as one of the independent variables, the age. But the sample consists of only university students. That means they do not vary much in the age. For example, the age was 18, 19, 20, 21, just a 4-year difference, but you included the age variable in the independent variable, and your theory says the old people may not be good at internet, and younger people may be more familiar with the internet. But we cannot see the relationship in the data, and the paper has the conclusion that age has no effect on the use of the internet. But we cannot accept the result, because in the sample, only the age difference was 4 years. So you have to check whether your variable has enough variance. And also, when you have proper result, you have to provide that result in a standard way. Usually, there are many ways of suggesting the numbers, but the common mistake might be the number of decimal places. Nowadays, the statistical package provide a lot of decimal places, and you just copy the output from the statistical output. Then sometimes the mean might be, for example, 3.3456, something like that. So we cannot be so precise measurement. So it would be enough to have 1 decimal place or 2 decimal places, but you provide too many decimal places. This is very easy to find, and also significant figures. Sometimes you just provide the percentage, 20% or 80%, but I cannot find what is the denominator of the percentage. And also there may be the legend or unit might be missing. So you have to provide all the necessary information which may be essential for the interpretation of the table. So if you do not know what information should be included, please try to style guide. In our journal, we follow APA style. So you have to see APA style guide, then you can find what kind of information should be presented in what format. And so I will summarize briefly what I told you. So when you write a paper, please try to provide the sampling process clearly and specifically. So do not be ambiguous. It's better to be transparent in our research methodology. So try to provide a detailed information of the data, especially how you did the sampling. And also, when you use the scale, always try to find the paper which validated the scale. And also consult the style guidelines. And nowadays, I found some statistical package provide the output which can be used in the paper easily. That means they just provide the output which is very following the APA style or some style guideline. In that case, you just copy the output and paste it in your paper, then it will be okay. So it depends upon the statistical package, but sometimes some packages provide the statistical package which produce very easily usable output. So find it. And here is the example of the style guidelines. For example, it does not show. This is the URL. You will go to these style guidelines later, and you will see how the APA style guide you to construct the paper or present the result in a proper way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jo. What his presentation about is he addressed some mistakes that are frequently seen in the methodology section of submission to the ASEAN Journal of Public Opinion Research. Careful considerations of what information needs to be included in the methodology and results sections will allow readers and reviewers to understand exactly what we have done and evaluate the quality of our research. So please pay attention on this matter. Even though it's more quantitative, we will discuss later on perhaps on qualitative or another methodology of research. So we will go to the next presenter. I would like to invite Dr. Bantugan. He is from St. Paul University, Manila, Philippines, and he also the co-editor of ASEAN Journal of Public Opinion Research. And Dr. Brian will talk about integral alignment in research. So time is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. I hope you can see it. Okay, so good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who are attending this session. I'm here to share about what alignment means across different kinds of research. Now, I'm very thankful for Dr. Cho for going through the details of quantitative concerns with regards to papers. I'll try to step back a bit and see more of a macro perspective on alignment, even including qualitative research. So yeah, so sorry, I skipped one there. So when we think about alignment in research, there are many layers of alignment. Immediately what comes to mind is really technical alignment, and Dr. Cho mentioned alignment of sampling and data and then discussion and the requirements of a journal. In this case, I'd like to focus on the different layers outside of the technical. So here on the screen, I mentioned constructivist alignment. When you submit a paper to a journal, you need to think about another set of interests, not just yours. So the journal is really a result of people thinking about your paper and how to present it to the public. And it has that constructivism, underlying the publication process. There's also the paradigmatic issue, the disciplinal issue, the theoretical issue, the ethical issue, the methodological, the presentational, and the editorial. So I'd like to go through each one very briefly. And if you have any questions later, you can just ask me the details. So number one, constructivism, I think is very important for all of us to understand. Because when you submit to a paper, to a journal, sometimes we assume that the article is solely the result of our intellectual capacity and our writing skill. When you submit to a journal, you actually submit it to co-construction with the journal. The journal has its own audience, it has its market, it has its discipline, and it tries to present your paper in such a way that the audience or the market will be able to understand it more. So even if you have a paper and you have data with it and you follow the technical requirements of the method that you use, that's just the first layer. When you submit it to a journal, you'll have to think about how your paper will transform to align with the discipline. Your discipline will be negotiated in the journal, the institution that you represent. So by submitting it to a journal, the article is no longer just solely based on the institution we represent, but also the journal that will be accepting your paper. And of course, publication, when we think about publication, there's a readership that you have to consider. So the language you will use will no longer be just the language of your discipline. It has to be the language of the broad range of readers that the journal tries to reach out to. So the article is no longer just your construction. It will be a construction of many different players. So number two, I think when someone is taking the PhD, it's not quite apparent, no, how the paradigm plays a role in the design of the paper and even the writing of the paper. So when I teach research at the PhD level, I often highlight this because the alignment starts with the paradigm. So the the dominant paradigm, no, in research is really quantitative. You go to social sciences, it's still very much influenced by quantitative. So, when you go to the social sciences, it's not just the quantitative that plays a key role. The qualitative flows into the quantitative, and the quantitative flows into the qualitative. And the mixture of the two doesn't necessarily mean the quantitative always has to be the dominant one, or the qualitative, no, just has to play a supporting role. No, if you're taking the positivist or post-positivist paradigm, you'd probably consider the qualitative elements of your research as somewhat of a what do you call this? Playing a supporting role. So in that sense, no, you begin to take the more positivist side of the post-positivist paper. There are journals, however, that are oriented not just dominantly on the positivist side. If you're doing a mixed method research, it is possible for you to highlight the qualitative and have the quantitative support the qualitative. So in that case, your post-positivist paper will be highlighting the interpretivist part of the paper instead of the positivist part. And that is the beauty of the social science paper. No? The social science paper can be submitted to a very highly quantitative journal, but it also can be submitted to a highly qualitative journal. And so the thing here is, if you're submitting to either of the journals, you'll have to take into consideration what is the paradigm of each journal. No, if the paradigm of the journal is mostly positivist, then the concerns of the positivist paper has to be addressed. And if you're submitting to a qualitative journal, then it will have a different set of concerns, no, potentially not generalizing the data over the population, but going more in depth. So what does it take to do a more in-depth paper? What are the requirements? No, so you'll have to consider that. No, if your paper is interpretivist, it will have to deal with the requirements of a wide array of interpretivist journals. No, and when I say wide array, it can be critical, it can be social science, it can be very pragmatist. No, so these different variations of the qualitative traditions, no, uh, will have to be looked into, analyzed, and considered before you write the paper if you're sending a qualitative paper. So I would think that writing to a qualitative journal will be a lot more difficult in the sense that you'll have to consider a lot more paradigms. Because under the interpretivist paradigm, there are many different subsets, no, there that you'll have to really analyze and figure out whether it suits your paper or not. Okay. And then, of course, the critical part is quite important in the sense that it will actually rely on a lot of narratives, will not ask you for models, no, for your framework. It will heavily rely on argumentation, no, so aligning your data with your theory is likely a heavy requirement in the presentation of the data. On the other hand, when you look at pragmatist papers, more applied sciences or applied humanities, then the requirements altogether change, because what they really want is the innovation part, no, and the research is a support, no, in the development of the innovation of a product, of a service, or a solution to a problem. So I think you have to take into consideration the paradigm, because it will not only influence the way you write your paper as a thesis or a dissertation, but also the way you write it for publication purposes. Your paper is also a reflection of your discipline. Some disciplines are quite homogeneous. Some disciplines are quite diffuse. So there are variations in the way they talk about data. And when you submit to a paper, submit to a journal, sorry, that journal will represent a particular strain or section in the continuum of disciplines within a discipline. Like say, for example, the communication discipline. No? Communication uses a lot of theories, from very highly positivist theories to very highly critical theories. And therefore, when you write a paper, no, you can actually address, no, different kinds of audiences. But the thing is, the journal will also reflect the different variations when it comes to the continuum of the disciplines. So some will be highly positivist communication journals. Some will be like highly critical, no, communication journals. Some will be an ambiguous mix, no, in between. So you have to be conscious about what is this journal about. You have to look at um, their profile, no? What is the mission of that journal? What does it look for? What were the themes in the past that it tried to focus on? Because there you will see to what extent the journal has tried to provide variations or try to stick to one particular kind of discourse. No? So that allows you to see, no, the amount of flexibility that you can assert or exert onto your paper. So there will be areas of contention, there will be divergences. One communication, for example, will diverge mostly because of the uh, diverse kinds of orientations that you will find in this discipline. No, some journals will be more focused on, say, critical theory, like neo-Marxist analysis, but some will be more statistical. So, you know, while it is communication, the orientation will definitely not be compatible now with each other. So you'll have to really look into what they're about. No, also the attitude on review of literature will depend on the orientation of the journal, no? When it comes to what particular discipline is highlighted or given more importance. And then eventually you'll have to think about intellectual ownership. Who really owns this paper now that you're submitting it to this kind of journal? No, will it align with, you know, critical studies more? No, where initially we're just, you know, very neutral, and you're submitting now to a critical studies journal. So where are you aligning your paper nowadays? Are you okay? Are you okay with aligning your paper to this kind of school of thought? No, because ultimately, if you're a PhD, you're building your body of work. So you have to consider, where is my body of work going to be aligned with? And eventually you realize some bodies of work or some paradigms do not necessarily meet eye to eye with other paradigms. So you'll be caught in between. So I think it's very important to see alignment between, you know, paradigms and disciplines as well, and being very conscious about the continuum that exists within a specific discipline, because that will be reflected in the varieties of journals you will find internationally. This is a very important area, no, theory. But theory, no, will really depend on the nature of your investigation. So some studies are quite highly theoretically based. Some studies do not want theoretical influence. some studies want to do want to construct theory and then supported by literature, at the end, in the discussion. So if you're quite aware of what the importance or the value of the theory is in your paper, it's easy to try to argue your case when, say, a referee tries to ask for theoretical grounding, when in fact you're conscious that your study does not require theoretical grounding. It does need theoretical discussion later on. So you'll have to be able to make that argument later. But to make that argument, you'll have to know the role of the theory within your scholarly work. No, the scholarship doesn't give equal importance to theory. No, it really depends on the orientation of the paper. And then next, ethics is very important. I think with the pandemic, shaping the way we see research nowadays, and shaping the kinds of research that emerged from the milieu that we found ourselves in the past 3 years. You begin to see the importance of ethics more. But in this case, I'd like to just point out that while it is important in general that we focus on the ethical practice of research, certain paradigms demand a lot more ethical discussion than others. I mentioned here some paradigms, say positivist or post-positivist, interpretive, and pragmatic. I highlighted them in bold letters because I think these paradigms will require a lot more ethical discussion. Say research on vaccines. While we're looking at say testing, laboratory experiments, and so on, you will see a lot of papers just trying to look at the numbers, where in fact people are trying to look at the meaningfulness of those numbers when it comes to the way they live their lives, their routines, policy, for example. So those numbers, while tested statistically, will have to require a little bit more discussion on ethics later on. So I think while the journals will not highlight this, if you're a very ethical scholar, you'll have to put this in your paper, given the context that we're all in right now. Or say if you compare post-positivist or the social science that has the influence of positivism, and interpretivism, which does not require or demand positivist orientation, post-positivism will have to sort of argue how positivism and non-positivism come together in a paper, and how does it impact the way meanings are discussed in the discussion section of your paper. So I'm trying to highlight that information, while they're important, their value actually wavers. They're not the same. They're not of the same value when we talk about ethics. And then when you try to look at interpretive or critical papers are driven by ethics, power relations. Interpretive, not so much. Some of them will have to, move around critical discussions. But I think interpretive studies should situate itself within the ethical discussion, simply because our milieu nowadays requires that scholars not only give us data, but also give us the significance of that data within the problems that we face. So the value of interpretivism is that you provide many different ways of giving meaning to a set of data, but it's not going to be a neutral society that you will present these interpretations. So you'll have to situate your interpretation within a given type of community, who are your target readers. And then finally, when we think about critical and pragmatic papers, I think when we talk about pragmatic papers, we recall one statement made by Mark Zuckerberg, no, when he said that when they were developing Facebook, they weren't really thinking about how this would change the landscape, no, of the whole world. And then now we experience a lot of the toxicity, a lot of the negativity, a lot of trolling, and so on. So critical papers would zero in on the power dynamics that we now face in social media. Pragmatic papers will be, will not be very conscious or aggressive in the discussion of ethics. But I think this is a good direction now. No, in writing pragmatic papers, you'll have to see how it will definitely impact lives. No, and you'll have to weigh the risks and benefits of the innovations that you present. So there. In terms of methodology, no, we'll try to look at reporting. No, reporting when it comes to the alignment with the method that you use. So when you write and you'll try to expand on the methodology section, I think these are areas you'll need to highlight. No, one, not just what the method is, no, what is the method in theory, no, how is it defined, where did it come from? Number two, how is the method appropriated? Now, some methods come from quantitative and then it's adopted in the qualitative. As you know, many things are lost in translation. So if you don't know the method in theory and then you adopt it in a particular discipline, some things get lost. Now, it will not be able to measure certain things when you move it to the mixed method design or a purely qualitative design, no? And you'll have to think about appropriation. It's a process of translation, and some things get lost, no, in translation. What is or are the limits of appropriation? So if you use a particular method, no, in a new study, different context and all that, what do you lose? No, when you use this method in another culture, what do you gain? What do you lose? So you'll have to be conscious about how methods impact data, no, in particular contexts. And then how did the researcher compensate for the limitations? Because we know that the way we use methods, no, in different studies will create certain changes in the quality of the data. Then you'll have to discuss, no, how these results can potentially be improved by tweaking it a little bit more, or doing something else, or maybe improving it in a way that you did not consider, no, earlier. Methodological papers will have to look into this, no. Also, when we try to look at presentation, you'll have to look at alignment when it comes to presenting your literature review and your theory. No? Some journals would put more emphasis on literature review than theory, but you'll have to still present the alignment between your theory and literature review. There has to be alignment between theory and the method, no? There has to be alignment between your discussion and literature review. So you go back, and then your discussion has to be aligned with your theory. So imagine the variety of ways by which you can write your discussion, knowing that you'll have to achieve levels of alignment between the different areas, no, in the paper. So this is, I think, very much in line with our concern today. You know, how do you enrich your discussion with theory, with literature review paving the way for theory, no, theory paving the way for, you know, studies in the literature review. So the flow, the continuum between these sections is favorable, no, to your writing of the discussion. And then, of course, finally, I'd like to highlight this, no, because not all journals are created equal. No, some journals are more powerful, some not quite. Some journals more marginalized, but there lies the power of that journal being at the margins. No, so I did a paper on a particular high-profile journal, very positivist in nature, and it released no as a particular article related to COVID-19. And then what I did was a critical paper, and then I tried to analyze the web of relationships it has with different corporate interests and what we normally perceive as a very objective, very neutral, very disinterested journal turned out to be the most conflicted when it comes to their interests. No, they had some political interests, they had commercial interests, they had network interests, and so on. So if you see that no happening, then I mean I think it's very crucial for us to think that publications will have some bias no, in terms of how they're related to industries or academic institutions and so on. No, like I think AJPOR is quite open in the fact that they want to help raise the voices of Asian scholars, no, and therefore the bias is towards that, no, helping the Asian scholars really find their voice and find the audience for their papers. So who owns a publication? No, who are in the editorial team, who are the members or the reviewers? I think you have to look into that too, because some scholars who do some editing work are very prominent in certain disciplines, and certain disciplines are very clear about what they want in research papers. No, so it will give you a clue, no, as to what are the chances of your paper being accepted or rejected. Number three, what scholarly fields are represented in the publication? Now, there are certain journals that are heavily quanti, certain journals more of a mix of the two. So there's a lot of opening for, say, continuum of discussions between quanti and quali, some more qualitative. So when you reflect on that and you see what kind of paper you have in your hand, then you will see how much chance you have, no, when you want to get published, no, in papers. And then finally, how much space is given to interpretive freedom. Now, some journals want to just stick to the numbers. Some journals want you to discuss the relevance of those numbers to current issues or social problems or policy. So if you see a journal that has this or that orientation, then you can potentially see how you need to write your paper in accordance to the amount of interpretive freedom the journal allows for the researcher. So overall, no, there are many layers of alignment a researcher has to achieve. At the PhD level, more and more you'll have to be conscious of that. No, some you'll learn through the process, some you can already look at, no, when you read the paper. Some are more important depending on the paradigm used and the orientation of the investigation. And submitting to external reviewers means subjecting your work to co-construction. So you'll have to be open now to listen to other people's ideas and opinions on your work, and it's going to be a journey of negotiating the value of your article with respect to your potential readers through the power of that journal. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brian Bantugan. It's give us the refreshing on academic writing, and he highlight not all studies are shaped by a theoretical framework. However, every study influences a discipline that shapes theory. As a systematic process, research does not only seek an organized process informed by theory, it also seeks to achieve to extend the possible integral alignment that has theoretical implication. He also highlights about our consideration on the author guideline and the nature of the journal that we want to submit our paper. So we now come to the third presenter. I will invite Sarah LoCascio. She will present about why should we cap building a theoretical implication with your literature review. So Sarah, time is yours.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, so my presentation is why should we care? Building theoretical implications with your literature review. So when I was thinking about what to present about, I thought about some of the most common reasons why papers are rejected by AJPOR. Hold on. I'll just do it from here. So often, especially desk rejected papers are rejected for being out of scope or for lacking theoretical implications. Another thing that's often asked for, sometimes before we even send it to reviewers, and sometimes it's asked for by reviewers, is to add to the literature review. And what papers rejected for these reasons all have in common is that they really haven't answered the question of why should we care about the topic of this paper. The first reason, the out of scope, it means they haven't said why the readers of this journal should care. Like Brian was saying, different journals and different audiences have different priorities and things that they're looking for. So if a paper is out of scope, it probably means you just haven't found the right place for it yet. And it's better for you and better for everyone if you can find that right place. Because if your paper is not in the right journal, then your readers who want to read it won't find it. And other authors who might be considering submitting to this journal might not know anymore what kind of paper this journal is looking for. And the databases won't understand what kind of journal this is. So it's just good to be clear and find the right place. So just before you submit to a journal, think carefully, like Brian was saying, about whether this is the journal that goes with your paper. And don't try to just make it your paper fit if it's not going to fit. So you can't just say government communication affects public opinion and then write a whole paper about government communication without mentioning public opinion again, or how these examples of communication from the government are affecting public opinion as evidenced by behavior or protests or survey results or anything, and expect that it fits the journal. It should really feel like everything fits the theme of the journal, your literature review and your paper overall. When a paper is rejected and we say lack of theoretical implications, like Brian said, it's not always a big theory. There's many different kinds of papers, but when a paper is rejected for this reason, usually it means that you haven't shown us why we need an academic paper on this. There might be journals that could have it, and there are many more kinds of research that are only practical and don't really fit in an academic journal. For example, a business might do a customer satisfaction survey, and it's not really academically relevant, right? They just did the survey to see how they can improve. Now, it might be have some methodological implications or theoretical implications, but those would need to be in the paper, and it would need to be those things that were the point of the paper. It's not just enough ever to, in an academic paper to just report your results. You kind of need to say why they're important. So how are they going to be important to the readers or to the development of this field? Is it going to help save lives? Is it going to change the way we do something? Does it change our understanding of a theory? Those are some questions you might ask yourself if you're trying to figure out why it's important. So the literature review section, I think, can be one of the most challenging sections. But it's important to understand what work has already been done in this area. And we really need to engage in it to contextualize our work and form our theoretical framework and form our hypotheses. Because there's really, it's very rare to have a completely original idea. Almost every idea is building off of work that someone else already did. And we need to know what's already been done if we're going to see if our idea is original. What is the gap in the previous work that our research is filling? And it also helps us understand how people have approached it before, and their work, whether we're doing the same thing or approaching it in a new way, might help us figure out the best way to approach it. So, and later it'll, it helps you fit it in. So, you know, sometimes you're confirming someone else's results, and so we can generalize it more than we believed, or sometimes it's contradictory, and so maybe we should be more careful in generalizing something. Kind of think about what it changes and why is this important. So you want to establish these things in the literature review, so that then in the discussion section you can refer to these papers again and show what's the same, what's different, and why this matters. The next section, I'd like to say some more practical things. As you begin thinking about how to write a better literature review, you would ask, I usually say, ask myself what has been done in this area already. It might be in another country, it might be in the country that we're working in, or you could even look in other fields to see if something similar has been done. And then what are the gaps? Have it not been done in this country? Has it, was there some kind of methodological problem with the previous research? What are you doing that hasn't been done before? Practically speaking, I made a list a little bit of what I do when I'm searching. Lots of times I use quotation marks around the term if it's a multi-word term. But if I'm not getting enough results, it kind of tells me I haven't found the keyword that other people were using. And I might start looking at other, if I can just find a few sources, I might look at their works cited list and kind of go from there. A lot of times you want to limit your search, especially in social sciences. You don't want to, probably the majority of your sources should be from within the last 5 years or so, as a rule of thumb. It's not an exact thing, and there might be times when you need a couple of older sources, like you want to refer to the person, to the paper that wrote a theory to begin with, or you might be tracking trends over a long time, or the area hasn't changed much. But if it's an emerging field, especially, you want to be sure to be using newer sources, because the older ones might not be relevant. And everyone knows this, but even in papers I've proofread, sometimes it happens that someone tries to cite something that they really shouldn't cite. I was editing a paper once and something was cited and it looked like it was just cited as a regular academic paper, but there was something a little strange about it. So I tried to figure out where it was from. I followed the link or something, and it was an article from a published online, and it, you know, the author ended up removing that sentence, and everything was fine. Just, you know, be careful what you're citing. Here's something else that happens often when papers get reviewed. Sometimes one reviewer says that the literature review is too long, and the other says that the literature review is not enough. And sometimes they might just disagree with each other, but sometimes both things can be true. Probably it means there's too much background information that's not really needed for this paper. And at the same time, there's not enough, they didn't find all of the papers that really are relevant to what they're doing in this paper. So some things need to be added, some things need to be deleted. So I came up with this kind of hypothetical example, but related to a lot of papers we looked at. So if you're writing about satisfaction or impact with virtual learning during the pandemic, what should you include? So you don't need to talk about online learning from 20 years ago. 20 years ago, maybe we were beginning to use the internet for some learning, but everything's changed since then. The development of video conferencing software like we're using now is completely different than 20 years ago. So those papers are not so relevant if we're looking at what was done in 2020 during the COVID-19 lockdowns or something. We don't need to know what was done in 2000. So, and if they're talking about education, they might start talking about other theoretical frameworks for education. But if they're not going to use them in the paper, they don't need to be in the literature review. And you do need to say something about COVID-19, but we don't need multiple paragraphs about the origins of it. Your readers who are reading it now already know, and the readers in the future who might not know just need to know there was a pandemic and many schools were closed, basically. You might consider including papers from 5 years ago. So there's a little bit of a difference in the online learning, but it's comparable enough, and you would want to have a discussion about how it might be different to suddenly switch during a pandemic versus choose an online classroom before then. But you would definitely want to include information about the number of students affected as part of showing why it's so important. And if there's been studies in other countries on the same topic already, a lot of studies were done right around the same time, and those would be worth including. As part of your literature review, you can often use other papers to define certain parts of your idea, or if the way you're using a term is different, or some scholars use it one way and some use it another way, you'll want to have that discussion and be very clear about how you're using any terms that are defined in your paper. I took this example from a paper we published.
Sorry, Sarah.
I think we're running out of time, so I'll just skip the examples.
And
we'll just skip to the end. Thanks, Dorien. So anyway, the summary is make sure that you include papers that show what work has already been done on a topic, show the gap that your study will fill, define the key terms that you use, and use the literature review to form the basis for your hypotheses. Don't include papers that provide basic information that most of your readers already know, or that talk about theories that aren't relevant, or that aren't from reliable sources, even if they seem to say kind of what you want them to say. And remember, a good literature review is more than a summary. It's kind of a conversation where you organize, synthesize, and evaluate previous research, and it finds the gap in that research and then helps you build your hypotheses and sets the theoretical and methodological framework for your work. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Sorry about the time.
No problem.
I hope all presenters will allow their presentation to share, yeah, with the participants later on. Okay, so Sarah was addressed some of the most common recent papers submitted to ASEAN Journal of Public Opinion Research are rejected, or extensive revision are requested, that the paper is out of scope, lack of theoretical implications, or that the literature review is incomplete. She also highlight the well-constructed literature review will let readers to know why they should care about the paper and how it is connected to the topic that covered by the journal. And at last, she also mentioned about that the literature review will be the basis for the discussion section following the results. So this is really important. And again, back to the first presentation from Prof. Jo, we learned about the how methodology really needed to be explained clearly and in detail. And then Dr. Brian covered about the paradigm, how we articulate the paradigm in our writing. And then Sarah addressed on the literature review. So we still have 13 minutes actually to discuss. If you have any questions, just write it down. Yeah. Oh, okay. We have a question from Dr. Hadi Sabaayon. Oh, he has two questions. First is how to do when several people write an article about a common issue with different theories, approaches, and descriptions. How to coordinate the contribution to make a coherent and solid text. That's the first questions. And the second, can we write an article based on one or more observations and not a study, especially if we justify the choice of these observations? I think these two questions can be answered by the three presenters. I will invite Prof. Jo first, and then Dr. Brian and Sarah. Please, Prof. Jo. You are still muted, Prof. Jo. I'm sorry. Please turn on your mic. Yeah.
Can I have some minutes, because it is very difficult to answer, so I have to think a little before my answer.
Okay, then maybe Dr. Brian can answer first.
Okay. I think there should be one person to write the whole article, just to have that singular voice, the way it's written, the tone of the writing, the style, that has to be established by one. However, if you have a group of people trying to put together a paper, I think it's important to have a matrix where you know your questions are, you know what your key theories, key concepts are, and those key concepts are the ones elaborated on by a theory. So not all theories will be important anymore. No? It will be important only insofar as it relates to understanding the concepts that are elaborated or has to be elaborated by the questions you want to answer. So I think that will sort of give you a backbone. That backbone will support the structure on which you will base the article.
Thank you. Yeah, because if it is a collaborative paper, then we have to know the main idea of the paper and how the contributor can contribute their thoughts. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Brian. Sarah, would you please add something from your perspective?
There's been times when I've written sections and someone else has written another section, especially, if one person did the statistical analysis and so writes that description, but the other people were involved in other parts of it. There's different reasons why it could happen, but if you're writing an article together, then you need to talk and kind of approach it in the same way. I don't know how you would write it together if you weren't kind of agreeing on the approach. You would need to figure that out first, I expect.
Okay, so you highlight about the same approach of the contributor of the paper, yeah, and also I think the paradigm of what Dr. Brian mentioned in his presentations will play a significant roles in how the writer start to write the paper and with the backbone of the same thought, yeah, same thought. Okay, Prof. Cho, are you ready to give the answer?
Yes. Okay, as to the first one, I think if all the researchers have one common research question, the one problem, they want to answer to the question, the same question, but each author or each researcher have different theory or different data, different approach to answer the same question. It may be one paper, but there's another question. Why do we need one paper for different approaches? So if they have enough reason to form all the, so they have the same question, but different strategy to answer the question and different theory and different data, then each approach can be one independent paper. Then why do they need to unite all of the approach together? There might be something which unite all of them. That means each answer is not complete without considering the other answers. If that happens, if that justifies enough, then it could be one paper. I have never seen such a paper, but I thought a little, then if they have a common question, common answer, and if each answer is not enough, but if all the answers together, it provide overall the proper answer to the research question, then it could be one paper. So paper means one common question and one common answer. In the middle, there may be different theory, different approach. It does not matter. It is my opinion. And as to the second, I can understand what it means, not a study. I do not know. One or more observation, what does it mean? That means if someone wants to study about the effect of, for example, job, some employment opinion effect on the performance, something like that, but he only observed one company case, or does it mean only one person respondent? I do not know exactly, but so same applies here. we want to answer the question, and the only approach to answer the question is just observation, then it could be a study. If the study has the objective way of presenting the result, why not? So the question here is that, can we justify just one or more observations? Why do we restrict our observation to 1 or 2? And is it enough to provide the answer to the question? So just observing one observation is enough to provide some evidence for the theory or for something, then it is possible. But one observation cannot provide anything to the answer, then it cannot be. So the question is, 1 or 2, it does not matter whether the data can provide the valid answer to the question. I think that is the most important question here.
Thank you, Prajo. So you highlight first is the questions, yeah, the questions, and then how the researcher answered the questions. Is it collaborative or can be divided into several papers if it's a standalone, yeah? So it's really depend on the importance of answering the questions in a collaborative way. Okay, yeah.
Yes,
Dr. Brian, yeah.
I'd like to comment on the second question. I think if I understand it correctly, there are studies that are quite rich. The scope is quite huge, and there might be sub-questions, no, in trying to answer the large question. So if that were the case, I would think that if you had 1 or 2 questions that comes up with 1 or 2 observations that are quite rich, for example, I would think it's possible to build a paper around 1 or 2 of these observations based on a research question that you were trying to answer. Because ultimately, a paper is really answering a research question. So if you think that 1 or 2 observations are able to capture the answer to one particular sub-question of that larger study, then I don't think there would be anything that would, prevent you from writing a paper out of that.
So is that means that, for example, comparative studies, observation from here and there, and then we do the comparison, for example.
Yes. Because thesis and dissertations are quite huge. The coverage is, the scope is really large. So if you just try to look at one research question out of the big dissertation, then why not, right? If the answer to that one question really explains a particular phenomenon.
Thank you.
If I may,
yes, please.
It depends upon the research question. For example, if one case shows that a person can live beyond 150 years old, then it is enough. I found one person who lived till the age of 150. So one observation is really important in studying human life expectancy. But if someone observes a person died at the age of 80, then this case does not provide anything to the theory, right? We all know that humans may have the longevity of 100 years, 80 or 90, then some person died at the age of 80, then this observation does not contribute to the theory. But if the observation includes the person who died at the age of, who is 150, it will be a great contribution to the theory, to the study of human expectancy. So I think all the valid or the usefulness of the data will depend upon how it can provide the answer to the question.
Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time. So again, it was a really fruitful presentation and discussion that enriched our knowledge for the PhD students to prepare their dissertations, and for us is as a refreshment, yeah, refreshing that we have to again practice and doing the academic writing. So just before I end this session, I would like to ask all the participants to turn on your camera because we will have photo sessions as a documentation